Joined by Ali Moreno. We'll be looking ahead to that game in a little more detail later on. However, in case you haven't heard, Barca are in search of a new manager. Xavi announcing that he will leave at the end of the season. He will, well, as it stands, they sit third in the table. They are 11 points off Girona at the top, who beat Celta Vigo earlier today. And we were talking last year about how brilliant they were defensively, about how that was the foundation of their success. Goodness me, that has changed so much over recent weeks. Of course, conceded 5 against Villarreal yesterday. We had to wait a long time to hear Xavi at his press conference, but eventually, here's what he had to say.
Anunciar doncs, que el 30 de juny no seguiré com a entrenador del Barça. És una decisió que hem estat parlant ara amb el president, amb Rafa Yuste, amb Alejandro amb Deco i amb part de l'estaf. Crec que la situació mereix un canvi de rumb i com a culer no puc permetre aquesta situació. Crec que ha arribat al punt d'anunciar-ho públicament, així ho tenia decidit ja fa uns dies, però crec que és el moment. Tal com han anat les circumstàncies, crec que el club necessita un canvi de dinàmica i sobretot com a culer, pensant en el club, en el bé dels jugadors també, pensant en ells, crec que també s'alliberaran, estaran més tranquils, crec que juguem amb massa tensió pel bé de la junta directiva, del club, com a culer, pensant com a home de club, crec que el millor és marxar el 30 de juny. Dit això, doncs donaré tot de mi aquests 4 mesos que quedan. A ver, no sé, para explicarme un poco más, pues la sensación de ser entrenador del Barça es desagradable, es cruel. Sientes que te faltan al respeto muchas veces, sientes que no te valoran el trabajo y entonces esto es un desgaste terrible, terrible a nivel de salud ya, a nivel de salud mental, de estado de ánimo. Yo soy un tío muy positivo, pero la energía va bajando hasta el punto pues de que dices, no tiene sentido continuar y así lo explico, pues y es así, lo tengo decidido hace tiempo, mis más cercanos lo saben, es una situación que, bueno, y que pienso que ya afecta al club. Una cosa es que me afecta a mí, pero el club sigue yendo, los futbolistas siguen ganando partidos, pero ya cuando afecta al club, entonces tengo que decidir yo que me marcho el 30 de junio, sin más.
Of course, this news dominates the sports newspapers in Spain. Marca, Barca sink and Xavi goes. AS says goodbye league, goodbye Xavi. Mundo Deportivo, Xavi bombshell. Sport, Xavi is going. Let's welcome in Luis Garcia, who has not slept since this announcement has been made because he's been working so hard. Sid also joins us pitch side. Sid, didn't you think watching that press conference it was just all a bit sad?
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, I'm one of those people that find it kind of quite sad every time a manager goes in almost any circumstances. But I think a coach like Xavi, with everything that Barcelona means to him and everything that he means to Barcelona, with the enthusiasm with which he took the job, with the sense that this was a guy that understood Barcelona, that represented Barcelona, that was everything that Barcelona aspire to be. And, you know, this is a coach that talks a lot. And I know, look, over the years, there have been times when people have kind of poked fun at him for this, but he talks a lot about kind of Barcelona's genetic makeup, about the idea of them having a clear identity that comes from Cruyff, that runs through Guardiola, that he's if you like, the continuity candidate. He's the coach that wants to do things the Barcelona way. And all of those things come together. And this genuinely, I think, means a lot for him. And you're right, it did feel a little bit sad. I don't think it was a surprise that he's not continuing into next season. I think the surprise was the timing of the announcement and the way in which it happened. We were talking about this in midweek, weren't we, after the midweek game, about how the way that Xavi has been talking in recent weeks has been talking about a guy that's not continuing. The way that he linked his future explicitly to success and then saw that success slip away one trophy at a time. The defeat against Girona in the league, the defeat against Real Madrid in the Supercopa, the defeat against Athletic in the Copa del Rey. The only thing left is the Champions League, and most of us really and truly don't think they've got much of a chance of winning that. And then, of course, the fact that after the Athletic game, he talked about how this was a new era because there were young players coming into the team, and he said, whether or not I am here. And so I don't think it's any surprise at all that he's not continuing. I think the nature of it And the way that he framed it when he talked about that tiredness, and those two words, by the way, cruel and unpleasant. To use those two words to describe the job of being Barcelona manager, that's pretty sad as well.
Ali, it's the first time we've had you on since the announcement's made. If I'm a Barca fan, I am concerned what's going to happen between now and the end of the season, because Champions League football is not guaranteed next season. You know, if you've got some of your more veteran players like a Lewandowski, Gundogan, how am I going to get the best out of them if they know that I'm not on board for next season?
Yeah, it's interesting that Xavi mentions in his press conference that the players are going to feel liberated.
Calmer. He used the word
calmer and liberated, and now that tension is not going to be there, that magically is going to disappear. And that he is liberated as well, that he's going to be calmer because now he's made this announcement. Look, if he has been worn down by the position of being the Barcelona manager to the point where he's talking about his mental health, then walk away right now. Walk away right now and allow somebody else to come in that at least is not worn down by the position yet, that is excited to show up every day and actually trying to find solutions. Not
and looking to prove them point for next season. Yeah, you don't need to look anywhere else. I'm your man.
Correct. And if indeed there's any apprehension from Xavi in showing up, that you dread every day to show up to work because of how much this job has worn you down, then what's the point of sticking around? And to your question, when he says that the players are going to be liberated, how does that work out? The tension is not going to go away if you're not getting results, and if indeed now you're in a position in which you're struggling to make top four. What happens when you get bounced out of Champions League? What happens when the next game comes around and you're still unable to defend? You're still unable to score goals. You're still unable to match whatever the Barcelona identity is, because right now this team has no structure and has no identity, and that's part of the reason as to why Xavi is in trouble and as to why this team is in trouble. How is that going to magically appear because you have made this announcement? I don't think there's a direct connection between the performance of the players improving and the announcement made by Xavi. He's making a connection that I don't think exists.
Do you agree, Luis?
Yeah, I totally agree. There is a moment where you have to decide to step on the side, and that's the one that he decided. Thing is that we don't have the two sides. We don't know if the president have asked to Xavi, listen, maybe Xavi last night when we talked that it was probably one of the most disappointing and sad nights of Barcelona after conceding those 5 goals, arrived there and say, listen, I resign, I don't want to be coach, just try to find a new way. And maybe the board said, listen, hang in here for at least until the end of the season and allow us to manage, because don't forget, in a couple of weeks they're going to play Champions League. And the whole of the season, the rest of the season, depends on that, on trying to do something. Bringing a new manager, he's not going to change in 2 weeks the direction of this team. So probably he received that connection and he decided to stay. But it's true that mentally it's something very, very difficult to handle into the dressing room, because the players are going to be thinking about this, a team that we talked that it has no soul, no leadership. And when the tough moments arrive, who is going to be the leader of this team? Who is going to push? Because the Xavi is going to be there, but they know that he's not going to be the manager until the end of the season. So there is a lot of problems to the dressing room that need to be addressed, and one of it is that mentality for the rest of the season.
What was interesting elsewhere in that press conference, he said, well, we would never have a Sir Alex Ferguson here because of you. Basically talking about the media and the criticism that managers receive, whoever they are. But he knew that, didn't he? He's been at that club long enough as a player to know the sort of criticism that these managers are going to get.
Well, and also to know the pressure that goes with this job. You look back at the 2 coaches who've been most successful before him, and you had Guardiola making the point when he left. He said, I have to go or we'll end up hurting each other. And Luis Enrique, when he went, said, I'm tired. I need a break. So Xavi knew this. I think there's loads of elements to unpick with that talk about the press. And by the way, I think this talks as well to that question of liberation. Xavi made the point post-game yesterday. Well, very post-game, because as you say, it took him an hour and a half to come out. When he said, if I go now, and I say I'm going now, you will, this will calm down. He said, if I stay and I didn't say anything, you would kill me. And I think the only bit of liberation that I can see now is that by putting out in the open, that constant questioning of what next? What's happening to your future? Is your job safe? Will you continue? That stops, because at least they know at the end of the season. But as you say, that idea that you're part of the problem now, I don't think it's a particularly outrageous thing to say that the press play a part in the degree of pressure there is at Barcelona. I think that is true. And Xavi said earlier in the season, didn't he, that the media, it gets to some players, and for some players it's really hard to live with. And he said then that it can be difficult for players, but not for him because he knows this. I think he's demonstrating that actually it is difficult for him. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I think it's entirely natural that it's difficult for you, but you know this. And the other thing that Xavi knows, but I think he doesn't want to say publicly, is that the things that are said by the press are not only said by the press. The things that get published, the criticisms that are made of Xavi, if you like, the little digs at him, the questions about his future, don't only come from the outside. They come from the inside as well. And I think that's the thing that hurts the most, of course, to know that some of the criticism, that some of the barbs, that some of the attacks on you are not just, here's a newspaper deciding to say this. Far more often, there's a reason for this. Someone on the board who's not convinced. Someone near the president who thinks that the way you're managing isn't right. A player who maybe isn't happy. These things don't happen entirely in isolation. Now, that's not to say the press is blameless. Absolutely, it's not blameless. But I think Xavi knows that. And as you say, Dan, that's the whole point in this. All of these things he says are mostly true. And yet I think if you like, the nuance or that little element isn't there in the discourse, and it probably needs to be. And I think deep down he knows that.
Who's the next manager going to be, Sid?
Well, this is a very good question because Barcelona don't have a huge amount of options, and also you have to convince those people to come. Now, right now, the obvious choice is Rafa Marquez, and I thought it was very striking that Marquez on Saturday night asked about this because, of course, he's the manager of Barcelona's B team. He has a post-game press conference. He's asked about this, and he says, well, you could never turn this down. And I think a lot of people felt that was a bit soon. It was a little bit kind of, oh, jump in me grave as quick, would you? There was a kind of real sense that maybe this wasn't the most tactful thing to say. But obviously he's a candidate. But I don't think he's a candidate that entirely convinces them, because I think if he was, then maybe this is something that happens now rather than in the summer. So now Barcelona have to look at people who, in theory at least, fit with their identity. But, of course, this is a club that at the moment isn't entirely sure of that identity. So you think about people like Michel at Girona. You think about people like Mikel Arteta, who, of course, has a Barcelona past. You think about people who play the kind of football that Barcelona, in theory, want to play. But I'm not entirely convinced that that's necessarily the case. I think, honestly, right now, if you were asking me to just throw a name in, not based on information, just based on the sense of where do you think this ends up, I would say Thomas Tuchel.
Wow. Who would you hire?
Honestly, there's a name that was also thrown around in the Spanish media, Hansi Flick. I don't know how that connection actually happens.
Wow.
Well, I know. And look, it's a name that's being thrown around. If indeed this is about Barcelona DNA, or this is about the Barcelona style of playing or entertaining or whatever the case may be, it would seem like the logical transition would be Michel from Girona.
Right.
It would feel like that's the sort of profile that you should go for. But it also becomes a question of what's affordable to Barcelona. And maybe the reason that actually Xavi is staying in position is because how does a club that's struggling financially go out and get a manager right now? And so you're sort of having to figure out your account first as to what is available to you and what you can afford, so that then you can go after a manager that you want. One thing on Xavi. We can blame the media. We can blame the players. We can blame the board, the president, the fans, the pressure, so on and so forth. What I would say about Xavi is a couple of things that are very damning. This team, instead of progressing, has regressed from last year. Instead of taking a step forward, has taken significant steps backwards. And the other thing I would say, in a must-win game yesterday against Villarreal, it was must-win. As must-win as it gets for Barcelona, he made decisions to play players that you cannot trust. He made decisions to play Oriol Romeo from the start. He made decisions to play Joao Felix from the start. That's on the manager. That's not on the club. That's not on the board. That's not on the fans. That's not on the media. He made those decisions. And those are the decisions that he has to answer for.
Sid, there's a lot of commotion in my ear with regards to your Thomas Tuchel answer. We just want a little bit more on that.
Well, I mean, you were asking me to throw a name out there, and I think this is a name that makes sense for a number of reasons. Now, I'm very reluctant to give you more on that because I feel like this will now end up being that Sid says it's definitely Tuchel. No, but he fits the profile of what Laporta wants. You would never ever. You would never, absolutely never stitch me up.
By the way.
Exactly. Hang me out to dry right now. But he fits, I think, what Laporta wants, which is the name. He's made comments that suggest that he would very happily go to Spain. Bayern Munich, I'm not sure, would be particularly concerned about him departing, in particular if they have a reasonable replacement. he combines that idea of you have a manager that wants a team to play technically well, but also has that kind of reputation. For what it's worth, I think it's slightly problematic on a personal level with some of the players in the Barcelona team, and I'm not sure how long it would last. But Barcelona at the moment are in a position where there isn't actually a plan in place. And for what it's worth, I think that's been part of the problem for the last couple of years. There's been ideas, there's been a sense of roughly where to go, but there hasn't been a clear plan. And to speak to what Ali was saying about all of the things you can talk about, and that idea of the genetic makeup of Barcelona, the DNA of Barcelona, Xavi is, if you like, the grand ideologue of Barcelona's approach. And yet you watch them, you say, well, that ideology is not there. They don't play that way. And regardless of whether you get beaten or you win or you don't win, if you haven't even got that identity, then there's not a huge amount there. Look at last year. Last year they won a very, very impressive league title from my point of view, but doing something very different. And the year in which they had to kind of, if you like, expand and become something a bit more, well, for want of a better word, a bit more Xavian, it didn't happen.
Luis, when it comes to the managerial discussion, where do you stand? You want someone that's more experienced, or give someone like Rafa Marquez a chance who could hopefully replicate someone like Guardiola?
Yeah, it could be Rafa Marquez. I will say that it could be a good choice if it is right now. Having a few months, you need to analyze everything. Not only what is the direction that we want to take, but also what kind of players we're going to have at the end of the season. That's something very important, because if you're going to have a bunch of players they're going to leave because you have them on loan, you need to, and what kind of players we are going to bring. So you need to think first about that, because we've been trying to build a team for Xavi, and probably is not the same team that probably the next manager is going to be. So very difficult to try to find. I think Tuchel could be a fantastic choice. I agree with Sid, and I heard a few rumors about Xavi moving to Bayern Munich in the coming years. If Tuchel is moving to Barcelona, who knows if that triangle can work out very well. But definitely we need someone with a lot of personality. Someone who can be a character, who can address well the dressing room, and can bring something extra, who can inspire these young talents that are coming now, because you have a bunch of talent that they can work and they can give, but definitely they need a leader who are handling on the side, because there is a lot that is missing there, and you need that big personality.
Luis Garcia and Sid Lowe say Thomas Tuchel. Right, okay then, let's see what else happened today, shall we? Celta Vigo against Girona.